Thank you so much, Shannon. And thank you to all of you who are joining us for our big annual event. I am Nathaniel Stinnett. I am the founder and executive director of the Environmental Voter Project. I use he, his pronouns. And oh my gosh, do we have an awesome evening for you tonight. As Shannon mentioned, it is 45 minutes long or 45 minutes short, followed by an optional Q&A. So I want to go ahead and get started so that we can jump right into this action-packed 45 minutes. First off, I want to thank all of the members of our host committee. You're going to be seeing their names. There are various tiers. You're going to be seeing their names as we go by, and you'll see it's a really long list. And I'm not going to say everybody's name because that would take up the entire 45 minutes. But please just know, all of you who are listed on these host committee tier lists, we are enormously grateful for your support. All of the results that we discussed tonight happen because of you, and happen because of our other donors, and happen because of our amazing volunteers. So really, thank you to all of you who are host committee members. I hope you take pride in all that we accomplished together, because we couldn't do it without you. So thank you, and I hope that all of you who are here in attendance thank any host committee members who reached out to you and invited you. This is what today is going to look like. I'm going to speak for about 12 or 13 minutes. I'm going to give the briefest of introductions to what the Environmental Voter Project is. But forgive me, because it's going to be extraordinarily brief. Although there are some first-timers here, many of you already know what the Environmental Voter Project does, so I'm just going to breeze through that. But what I'm going to spend my presentation time doing is giving an overview of where EVP is in our own sort of lifetime, where we've come from, where we are now, and where we are going. Because a lot of people have been with us for a year or two, but they may not have known how we began. Or they've been with us since the beginning, but might not know where we're going. And as I'm discussing that, don't worry, I will get into some of the results and even some of our new experimental results. Then you're going to hear from our amazing keynote speaker, Jade Begay. You're going to hear from one of our volunteer leaders, Perry Mizota. Then we're going to have this fun poll, kind of like what we did last year, because it was so successful, where all of you get to vote on a little mini briefing that I'm going to give. You get to choose the topic, and then I need to try to make it happen. And then you are all going to donate an enormous amount of money to support our work. And then we're going to finish and have an optional Q&A. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. And for those of you who are joining us a little bit late, please put any questions in the Q&A and know that we are going to have this optional Q&A afterwards. All right. In a nutshell, what we do at the Environmental Voter Project is just two things. We identify environmentalists who don't vote, and then we turn them into better voters. That's it. That's what we focus on. We do not try to convince people to care more about climate or the environment. Not that that's not important, that's very important. Instead, what we do is we bypass that. We want to bypass the hard, messy, expensive stuff of politics, which is changing people's opinions, and go right to the somewhat easier and cheaper part, which is finding the people who don't need their opinions changed. They just need to start voting. So in a nutshell, for those of you who are new to EVP, that's what we do. We use data analytics to individually identify people who care so much about climate or the environment that it's their top priority, yet they aren't voting. And then we work with them year-round to turn them into better voters. And the reason we have this very specific focus is because it turns out this is not a very small niche. For better or for worse, this is an enormous niche. As many as 13 million already registered super environmentalists skipped the 2022 midterms that just happened last year. They're already registered. And our research shows that they don't just care about climate and the environment. They literally list it as their top priority over all other issues. Yet they didn't walk out the door and cast a ballot for the most recent midterms. Over 8 million skipped the presidential election in 2020. And you can shake your head in frustration at this, which we do every now and then. But what I want to suggest to you is that this is also an enormous opportunity. It's an enormous opportunity because we live in a moment in time where it's become almost impossible to change people's minds about anything, let alone climate change or clean air or clean water or environmental justice. These are hard things to pull people into believing and into caring about. But what these enormous numbers represent are people who don't need their minds changed. They're already with us. They just aren't voting. And so what we do with the Environmental Voter Project is make this purely behavioral intervention. And it's a 4-step process. Very, very briefly, and excuse me for going over it briefly, but we do want to get to a lot of stuff, and this is not sort of an intro to EVP. But for those of you who are new to us, hopefully this is an appetizer that really whets your appetite for more. First, we work with data scientists to identify these non-voting environmentalists. How do we do that? Well, we build what's called predictive models on voter files. These are the same tools that very sophisticated presidential and US Senate campaigns use to identify voters. But very briefly, what they are is we poll tens of thousands of people, identify the ones who list climate and the environment as their top priority, then see what we know about them on voter files and in census information and other publicly available data, and then try to find other people like them. And it's a long iterative process, but at the end of it, what we are able to do is assign an individual score to every single person on the voter file, not just telling us who cares about climate and the environment, but which of them care about it so much that it's their #1 priority over all other issues. And I know it sounds like a convoluted process, and I'm happy to get into more detail during the Q&A if you're interested, but this is frighteningly precise. And what this enables us to do is go to step 2, and then know that we have this group of people who you shake them awake at night and they're going to scream climate change. They just aren't voting. And we know that they're not voting because that's public record. Then we can work with thousands of volunteers to canvass and call and mail and send digital ads to these voters just to do one thing, and that is get them to start voting. Then 3, habit reinforcement. We work year-round talking to these voters in elections big and small. Even just this year, an odd year, we've been active in 134 elections already, I believe. This is how you change people's habits. You can't just talk to them once every 2 years when there's a big, sexy federal election going on. That's not how it works. We use every election to change their behavior. And then 4, ultimately, our goal is to build such an enormous block of environmental voters, not non-voters, but voters, that we scare the bejesus out of politicians into doing what we need them to do. Because ultimately, nothing motivates a politician more than the prospect of winning or losing an election. And so they do what voters demand that they do. That's what EVP is. This is how we got to doing this work. Actually, I'm sorry, before we get to doing this work, we're currently working in these 19 states. And don't worry, you'll see maps like this again soon. We started with a really small proof of concept, for those of you who don't know, back at the end of 2015. It was going to last for 16 months, but we didn't have the money. It was just me with an idea. And we ultimately got 518 people to not give us the money, but give us a promise to give us the money if we raised $400,000 in commitments. And we did it. And so when we got that $400,000 in commitments, all of the commitments went live, and we were able to run that year-long proof of concept in 2016. And we really just wanted to prove two things. One, can we accurately identify these non-voting environmentalists? And two, can we increase their turnout rates? And as you can see on this slide, we passed both with flying colors. After we had a list of these super environmentalists, we said, thank you very much, data scientists. And we called up another polling company and we said, hey, can you call this list of people and ask them an open-ended question off the top of their head what their number one priority is? And 89% of the respondents said, oh, climate change, why do you ask? It was enormously accurate. And then as I'll show, in randomized control trials, we were able to dramatically increase turnout, and we've continued to be able to do that. That gave us the confidence to then expand into 5 additional states, which you'll see right here. And in 2017 and 2018, what we wanted to know is, okay, can we expand into additional states and recruit the volunteers it will take to mobilize all of these voters and the money it will take to mobilize these voters? And as you'll see, very, very quickly, we got up to having thousands of volunteers who contact these low propensity environmental voters for us. And we were very fortunate, thanks to many of you on this call right now, to also get the funding to do that. Going into 2019, we further expanded until we were in 12 states. And then in 2021, expanded again so that we were in those 17 states that you see there. These years, we were focused on, okay, can we consistently get good results increasing turnout in federal elections and state elections and local elections? And can we do it a lot? Can we do it all the time? And you'll see we averaged 281 elections each of those years. We did tons and tons of work. And perhaps most importantly, in randomized control trials, and I'll get into more detail in this later if you're interested in the Q&A, but in randomized control trials, we were able to prove that we were solely responsible for increasing turnout over a control group that we had set aside ahead of time that we ended up not talking to. And this is really important because we don't just want to look at voter files and say, oh, look, all the people we contacted started voting. Oh, that's great. No, we want to know that we're actually responsible for that, not some presidential campaign or another group or the weather. And what these randomized control trials showed just over the last 4 years is that in federal, state, and local elections, generals, primaries, and specials, we have dramatically increased turnout while controlling for all outside variables, including other campaigns. And we have the receipts to show it on our website on the results tab. Please go and read our reports, read these randomized control trials. We not just want to be able to prove to you, our donors, and you, our volunteers, that what you are supporting and what you are doing works. We want to prove it to ourselves. We are doing this for the results, nothing else, believe me. And what that has also enabled us to do is over the long term now, since we began, we have spoken with 9.5 million unique low propensity environmental voters, all of whom by definition were awful voters or we wouldn't have been talking to them, right? Well, as of this past February, we can see on voter files that almost 1.5 million of them have now become such consistent voters that they voted in their most recent federal election, their most recent state election, and even their most recent local election. Now, to be clear, this does not have the same rigor as a randomized control trial. We can't claim that we're solely responsible for turning 1.5 million non-voters into super voters. This is a different metric, but we're pretty darn responsible. No one else over this period of time has mobilized voters for literally 1,800 elections. We're enormously proud of these results, and we hope that you are too. We've garnered a lot of attention because of this that we're very proud of, and we hope that all of you are very proud of. And right now, where we find ourselves is at a crucially important moment in time. I don't think any of you need me to tell you where we are in the course of the climate crisis and where we are in the history of American democracy. but the next 14 months are going to be everything. And what we are focused on for the next 14 months is, now you'll see we are in 19 states. We have expanded into Nebraska and Louisiana, and we are focused on two things. One, going deeper in these states. What we know from our randomized control trials is that we can get really good results from making light touches on people, but we can make heavy touches. We can triple or in some instances even quadruple the amount of money we spend contacting these voters before we even begin to see a drop-off in efficiency. In other words, last year we raised $3 million. We think we can raise and spend $9.8 million. And that $9.8 millionth dollar that we spend will get us the same return on investment as the first dollar that we spent. That's how much more efficiency we can squeeze out of this. And we also want to get a lot of that funding in the winter, spring, and summer, because we work year round. And so we want to try to even that stuff out. And that's why monthly contributions are so important. All right. This is why, especially heading into the next 2 months, these 2023 elections are so important. Because building habits is something that we work on year round, but also because you look at some of these places where we're still facing budget gaps, and I promise you, these are going to be the areas that you're freaking out about next year. You want to make a new environmental voter in Georgia or Pennsylvania or North Carolina next year? Well, the best, most efficient way to do that is to start talking to them now. Even little elections like the Savannah, Georgia mayoral race, where we're targeting 15,000 people. You don't think that's important? Donald Trump moved heaven and earth to try to find 11,780 votes in Georgia. He worked so hard at it, he's going to be appearing in a trial in a few months because of it. So yeah, 15,000 votes in Georgia is really, really important. This is why we need your support. And before I hand it over to our amazing keynote speaker, for the first of many times tonight, we are going to ask you to contribute to support our work. There is a link in the chat that you can click on to make a donation, or you can hold up your phone. For those of you who don't know how QR codes work, these weird squares here, just tap on your camera icon, aim at this weird square, and you should see a URL pop up that you can just press, and that's our donation link. All right, I want to get to our amazing keynote speaker, Jade Begay. So many of you know Jade because you may have seen her work, you may have heard of her work, or maybe you were on a phone bank that Jade headlined for us last year. But for those of you who don't know Jade, she is an extraordinary climate activist and leader, and you're in for a treat. Very briefly, what I want you to know is she is the Policy and Advocacy Director for NDN Collective, a nonprofit that empowers Indigenous communities. And please check out their link in the chat so you can learn more about NDN Collective's amazing work. Jade was also recently appointed by President Biden to serve on the White House's inaugural Environmental Justice Advisory Council. So even the White House knows how awesome Jade is, okay? And we are particularly happy to have Jade with us tonight because, as we know at EVP, Native Americans are disproportionately large part of the non-voting environmentalists who we try to mobilize. And Jade is joining us tonight to talk in part about the unique voting barriers that Native Americans face and the tremendously important role that they could play, well, in any election, but in the 2024 House and Senate and presidential elections, if we are able to overcome those barriers. So that's enough for me. We are so, so grateful and excited to hear from you, Jade. And so take it away.
Thank you so much, Nathaniel. Good evening, everybody. Again, my name is Jade Begay. I am a citizen of Tesuque Pueblo, which is, if anyone's ever been to Santa Fe, New Mexico, that is in the realm or the zone of my ancestral home. But my tribe is about 10 miles north of Santa Fe, and that's where I'm based. But I'm greeting you all tonight from, or this evening from Washington, D.C. And I'll say more about that later, but I am just really honored to be here tonight to share with you all some stories and reflections on this work and how we strengthen voter turnouts. Something that I feel is truly one of our most important tasks in the next year and beyond, right? And because I believe in this work so much, I want to offer you all something which I feel is pretty special. I hope you all do too. But I want to share with you all a very special sneak peek into a publication that I'm a part of and read an excerpt from this publication that has yet to be announced. This excerpt shines light on some of the context of voting for Native people. And this book is, or this publication is going to be a collection of different strategies and approaches that different organizers have taken. And you'll hear about it, down the road. I can't say more than that, but here is the sneak peek, if you will. All right, here we go. It's only been 3 generations since Native people gained the right to vote. In 1924, Native people, the original peoples of so-called United States, mind you, were finally given citizenship and legal protection of the right to vote through the Snyder Act. Our right to vote came 54 years after African American men and 5 years after American women gained the right to vote. However, like many people experienced, the right to vote was not fully secured in 1924 on the state or local level. Similar to many pieces of legislation in the US, the Snyder Act left it up to the states to implement, and it wasn't until 40 years later when all states allowed Native Americans to vote. Today, nearly 100 years later, voting is still not universally accessible for Native people or other people of color. I mention this history because it is a core value of mine to do the due diligence of learning and acknowledging the work that has come before me so that I am building upon the groundwork of our movement ancestors and elders. I also look to the past and what came before me to learn from the missteps or strategies that didn't yield results so that we are evolving and improving our approach as time goes on. End of excerpt. So with that little piece of this larger chapter, I want to talk about what's worked and what hasn't, and how we're strengthening our strategies for the months and years to come. So here's some more context. As far as challenges regarding the Native vote, here are some things that I want to name. And I'm actually going to be referencing a lot of data from a really important report that I encourage people to read just because it outlines a lot of really amazing information about Native people and Native communities just in general. But this report is called the Indigenous Future Survey, and it's done by Illuminative and the Native Organizers Alliance. So when it comes to voting, we know that living rurally and not in close proximity to a city has been and continues to be a barrier for Native voters. And this is escalating with voter suppression laws that make it illegal to get out the vote of organizers to collect absentee ballots for voters. And that's been a method that has been really popular for Native people and makes it easier for them, especially those living on reservations or without transportation or the economic ability to move and have more mobility to go vote. So without that strategy, people are, really left to figure out how to access drop boxes. But drop boxes and election offices can be located miles away from reservations, making it again very burdensome for tribal citizens. And an example of this is the Blackfeet Reservation in Montana, which is almost the size of Delaware, and has nearly 17,000 enrolled members. Yet in 2020, it only had 4 ballot drop-off locations, and until a successful lawsuit was brought, which provided an additional satellite office on the reservation. As many of you probably know, in recent months, states around the country have enacted dozens of restrictive voting requirements. This is also a burden on Native communities as reservations don't have traditional street addresses. I can testify to that. My mom's, we've never had an address at my mother's house that's recognized by the USPS. And ballot drop boxes, polling places, and election offices are sometimes located, as I referenced, hundreds of miles away from reservations. So back to the transportation and accessibility issue. And then there's, of course, the impact of discrimination and distrust with the government. In the Indigenous Futures Survey that I mentioned earlier, 96% of Native people polled, and they polled roughly around 6,000 Native people, don't trust the US government to make good decisions about issues that matter to Native people. And to me, what that stat tells me, it's like an opportunity. It's a barrier for sure, but it also feels like an opportunity for potential candidates and allies to address and show us that they can be the kind of leader who wants to restore that dynamic. At the end of the day, a lot of this does come down to an adequate investment into voting, resources, and infrastructure on reservations. So on the challenges and the barriers side, the top 4 barriers, in summary, for Natives being able to vote are not receiving absentee ballots on time, not being able to access polling due to location or distance, or work hours. So the polling place being too far away, and then the line being too long. This also came up in the survey. So those were the 4 main reasons why it was challenging for Native people to vote. So what are we doing about it? And as Nathaniel pointed out, I just want to echo, this interesting fact that the Environmental Voter Project targets are disproportionately Native American. And this makes a lot of sense because of all the barriers and challenges and systemic issues that I just mentioned. And so here are a few examples of how EVP targets Native communities. In Arizona, 1.9% of registered voters are Native American, but 7% of EVP's mobilization targets are Native American. In Alaska, 4.2% of registered voters are Native American, but 12.9% of EVP's targets are Native American. And in my ancestral home or my home state of New Mexico, 5.4% of registered voters are Native American, but 12.6% of EVP's targets are Native American. And also, EVP this fall will be running mobilization campaigns for municipal elections in Alaska, Arizona, and New Mexico, all of which include significant numbers of Native American voters. And in 2024, EVP will try to mobilize over 100,000 Native American low propensity environmental voters across 19 states. And I really do feel like this is the right approach because we know that from the data that groups like Illuminative and Native Organizers Alliance have collected, that Indigenous peoples vote more in battleground states. And we also know from that data that climate is a priority for Native voters. And this is shown in various ways as well, not just from the data collected in that report, but just in the issues that you see, that are common for Native people to align with. And we also know that while we must reduce the barriers for Native voters living on reservations, Indigenous peoples in small towns and cities are most likely to vote. So yes, we need to focus in addressing the needs of those living rurally, but we also can't forget that a majority of Native Americans live in urban areas and that they play a critical role. So with that, I want to share a couple of final reflections. Today, as I mentioned, I am currently in DC. I was in DC earlier today, and I was actually at the White House with my organization where we were holding a direct action at the White House, and celebrating. It was an action calling for the clemency of Leonard Peltier, but also celebrating his birthday. And if you don't know who Leonard Peltier is, please go research him and how he is the longest held prisoner of war in the United States, and he's Native American. And this might not seem like an environmental issue, but it is because Leonard Peltier was imprisoned because he was protecting his people's sovereignty. He was standing up for our relationship to the land and how that relationship is intertwined into who we are as Native people. So I name this because this is just one example of how we, meaning like the environmental movement, the climate movement, our allies who do voting work, who show up who want to show up as allies to us, must broaden what we interpret as environmental issues. Further, how do we, you and me, make it so that leaders who need our votes speak to these issues that matter to Native people, like the Leonard Peltier issue? Because I'm telling you, if more leaders spent more time learning about our issues and speaking to them on their campaign trails, that stat I mentioned earlier of how 94% of Native people don't trust elected leaders to make decisions on behalf of us, that would shift. And we need that to shift. We need to restore trust. So I leave you with the sentiment, and this is from my mentor, Faith Spotted Eagle, who is I believe, one of the only Native people who's been brought into the Electoral College. She taught me that every single American if you are an American citizen, you are a treaty signer. Therefore, you have a responsibility to act as a treaty upholder or a treaty breaker. And what's more is that you have a responsibility to make sure that our leaders are also upholding these sacred agreements with tribes and Native people. So in that spirit, I hope each of you goes out into the world now and urges potential leaders or organizations or friends and so on to learn about and speak to Native issues so that we can continue seeing changes that address more than just the environmental issues that we're talking about today, but systemic issues. Thanks. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Jade. I hope you all are feeling just as excited and fired up as I am. Again, please check the chat for the link to the NDN Collective in ways that you can get directly involved with Jade's fantastic work. I am about to pass it off to one of our fantastic volunteer leaders here at EVP. Being a volunteer leader is a whole step above showing up in phone banking or postcarding or canvassing. These are the folks that are teaching all of you and bringing you along in a volunteer capacity to join us in this movement. So many of you on this call are probably already familiar with Perry Mizota, who has been with us for about 2 years now. He got started at an event exactly like this 2 years ago. So Perry, we're excited to hear from you.
Thank you, Shannon, and hello, everyone. As Shannon said, my name is Perry Mizota, and I live in the San Francisco Bay Area. And as Shannon just mentioned, this is quite a full circle moment for me to speak to all of you today, because it's at this event 2 years ago when I first got introduced to EVP. By the end of that event, I was already thinking, how can I help EVP? So through my friend who invited me and my wife 2 years ago, quick shout out to Eileen, I got introduced to Nathaniel, who then introduced me to Shannon. They were both so welcoming, and as the saying goes, the rest is history. Since October of 2021, I've hosted phone banks for EVP almost on a weekly basis. I've written hundreds of postcards, and I've done a couple miscellaneous projects. What I want to focus on over the next few minutes is why I dedicate my time to EVP and why I think it's a great organization to support, not only financially, but also as a volunteer. The first reason is the cause. Climate change is for real, enough said, particularly after the summer our world just experienced. Also, I've been pretty involved in politics, from running local political campaigns where I live to doing voter protection work for different states. So the work EVP does combines a cause I care about with my personal political interests. But you can argue that there are other organizations that are doing great things for the environment politically. So why EVP in particular? The first reason is the people. I love the people at EVP. They are a small but mighty team, and they really care about their volunteers. As an example, after each phone bank I host, I send them a summary with some thoughts on the phone bank. This might include some suggestions made by a volunteer or some issues faced by a volunteer during the phone bank. Then often, after I send them this type of message, they will then send a follow-up email to the volunteers that made the suggestions or faced issues. That email might include a change they've made as a result of the feedback, a further explanation as to why something may have occurred, or simply an acknowledgement of the volunteer's experience. This is not common, at least when it comes to other organizations I volunteered for. You can't help but feel appreciated when you volunteer for EVP. Second, I love the approach they take. There are a couple elements of EVP's approach worth noting. The focus they take on those who don't vote regularly is a novel approach. A nice benefit from a volunteer perspective of calling unlikely voters is that the people we call aren't typically bombarded by campaigns, who tend to focus on likely voters. So they tend to be more open and appreciative to calls, which makes the phone banking experience a better one. And while I have not done canvassing for EVP, I'm guessing that the canvassing experience is also a better one because of that too. Also, I'm a nerd at heart, so I love the analytical approach EVP takes, not just in how they identify their target audience, what I consider their secret sauce, but also how they deeply analyze every activity they support. They do not ask volunteers to do anything that they know wouldn't result in a tangible benefit, whether that is phone banking, canvassing, or writing postcards. As a volunteer, I really appreciate that. Okay, so I've talked about EVP's people and the approach they take. The third reason why I think EVP differentiates themselves from other organizations is the results. As you saw earlier, it's impressive how many super voters EVP has created in a relatively short period of time. It never hurts to volunteer for an organization that is delivering meaningful results. So in closing, I hope you can tell that I'm a big fan of EVP. I plan to continue doing whatever I can for them, both as a volunteer and as a donor. And I hope all of you are already thinking what I thought 2 years ago. How can I help EVP? And along those lines, I'm hosting a phone bank tomorrow at 3 p.m. Pacific, 6 p.m. Eastern. And I hope some of you can join me in calling into New Hampshire, Manchester, New Hampshire. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Perry. And I hope many of you will see Perry again tomorrow. I know you are such a valuable part of our team. All right, moving swiftly forward into the Choose Your Own Adventure portion of the event. So right about now, you all are seeing a poll pop up in front of you. You have just a few seconds to vote on which topic you would like Nathaniel to give a rapid fire mini briefing of in just a moment. And just in case your topic does not get chosen for tonight, anyone who makes any donation through the link for today's event, which you'll see in the chat and in your email, will get a recording tomorrow of the other 3 briefings. So Nathaniel is literally going to record those tomorrow, and you will be the first to see them. So hopefully yours gets picked tonight, but just in case it doesn't, do know that you will have that second opportunity if you donate to us in the link. All right, I think everyone has voted now. You all will see the results in a moment, but Nathaniel, just by a hair, successful EVP messaging experiments is what folks want to hear about today.
All right, all right. Well, let me go ahead and share my screen and talk about some successful experiments.
And while you're getting that up, Nathaniel, I'll also let folks know, in case the poll didn't go away for you automatically, you can just click that X in the upper right corner so that you can see Nathaniel again.
Great. All right, folks, this is going to be a mini briefing. It's going to last about 5 minutes. Then we're going to have 2 or 3 more minutes before we close. So we're probably going to go about 3 minutes over. But I think we've done a good job keeping the schedule here. All right, you wanted to hear about successful EVP messaging experiments. Here we go. The first one I want to talk about is loss aversion. This happened to be a mail piece. For those of you who are not familiar with the behavioral psychology concept of loss aversion, it's the basic concept is this. People hate losing things. We hate losing things so much that we will be more upset at losing $3 than we will be excited at like finding $3 in our pocket. We are averse to losing. All right. How did we manage to successfully put a concept like that into a voter turnout message? Well, we did it by targeting what's called drop-off voters. These are people who vote in presidential elections, but we consider them low propensity or unlikely to vote in other elections, like in this instance, 2022's primary and midterm elections. And so what we did was we kind of flipped the script. Instead of making voting in a midterm, or in this case, a 2022 primary, something new that they needed to do, we wanted to convince them to do this for the first time. Instead of doing that, we endowed them with the value of their previous vote. What we said was, thank you for voting in 2020. Don't ruin all this good stuff that you just started. You just had a good voting record. You just voted for the first time in a presidential election. Don't screw it up. We wanted to give them this thing of value and then paint this upcoming election that we know from public voter files they never vote in. We wanted to make it seem like that would be a loss, that they would lose something if they skipped that election. They would lose this valuable thing that they had accrued. Very simple design you'll see here. We do not care that our stuff looks pretty or ugly. We just care about it working. On the other side, you'll see it was even uglier, but it was very simple. You want to be a good voter. We had a little bit of what's called social pressure messaging in there. Who you vote for is secret. But the real thing, this loss aversion messaging, thank you for voting in 2020. Keep your good voting record in 2022. It was all about don't screw up this thing that you've now got. It increased turnout 0.8 percentage points over our control group. And we know that this was a statistically significant result, which means it was not due to random chance. Perhaps most interestingly, though, That 0.8% bump came almost completely from men. This is also the type of data that we're really, really interested in, because we want to be able to send the most effective messaging to the right subsections of these low propensity environmental voters whom we're targeting. All right, so loss aversion, that's one example of a successful message that's worked for us. Another one, and many volunteers might recognize this, this is a brand new experimental result that we haven't announced yet. This was the volunteer postcards that many of you sent to low propensity environmental voters for the Philadelphia mayoral primary that just happened a few months ago. We had a little bit of social pressure, I'll get into what that is, and some of this same loss aversion. So here we were thanking people who voted in 2022, great job, but they had never voted in a municipal election, and we wanted them to vote this past spring. So thank you for voting in 2022. Keep your good voting record by voting in the May 16th election. And this is what our volunteers wrote. So that loss aversion message was there. We also had a little bit of what's called the typical social pressure message. This is reminding people that who they vote for is secret, but whether they vote or not is public record. If you remind people that whether they vote or not is public record, that also tends to increase turnout, because we know that being a good voter is a societal norm that most people buy into, even if they're not good voters. And so if you let them know that, hey, like your neighbors can check on whether you vote or not, that drives turnout through the roof. What we now know from recently updated voter files, and congratulations to all of our volunteers who wrote those postcards, we had a statistically significant result where we increased turnout just from these postcards alone, 1.5 percentage points over our control group. It's a big result, a big result. Ask Donald Trump how big a deal 1.5% is in Pennsylvania. Obviously, it's easier to do it in an odd year, but still a big result. All right, the last message, successful messaging experiment that I'll go through, and this is from a few years ago, tested the behavioral psychology concept of endowed progress. This happened to be a digital ad. Yeah, I know the colors are loud. I know it hurts your eyeballs. That's the point. We don't want to make pretty stuff. We want to make stuff that works. And this worked. A little digital ad. It wasn't even a video. It was just a display ad, a boring static ad. The idea behind endowed progress is if you've never voted before, we don't want to make it seem like you're going from 0 to 1. Instead, we want to make it seem like, oh my gosh, you're almost there. You're almost voting. You just need to take this one last step. We are endowing people with this idea that they've already progressed close to the finish line. You're registered to vote. You're active on the rolls. The last step is just voting. The last step is just voting. These simple, very, very cheap static ads, not even video ads, increased turnout 0.5 percentage points, which because of the size of the audience was a statistically significant result. So these are 3 examples of endowed progress messaging, loss aversion messaging, and social pressure messaging that we have found to be extraordinarily impactful. And we have the receipts on our website on the results tab to prove it. These are statistically significant results in randomized control trials, which means there is a greater than 95% chance that this was not due to random occurrence whatsoever. We have controlled for all outside variables. All right, we're a few minutes over. I'm going to rush to the finish here. My final call to action. If you don't know what a call to action is, it's kind of what it sounds like. It's, I'm going to ask you to do something. And what I'm going to ask you to do is donate. I'm going to ask you to contribute to support our work. And why? We already know who these low propensity environmental voters are. I mean, not to be creepy, but like we literally know them by name and street address. We now have close to 200 of these randomized control trials proving that we know how to turn non-voters into new voters and new voters into consistent voters. We are ready to go. We just need the money to make it happen. We make 80% of our annual expenditures over the next 8 weeks, heading into Election Day. We have $1.4 million left to raise. And the best way to get us towards that 1.4 million is to help us reach our $400,000 goal for this event. This is where we are on that goal. I think that's 85% of the way there, 85% of the way there. We have almost $59,000 left to raise. I want to thank all of you who have helped us get this far, but for those of you who haven't donated yet, please do so now. And if you just need a reminder, these are the remaining budget gaps we have just in some of the elections that we're going to be focusing on coming up. And as a reminder, next year this time, think about all of these states that you're going to be freaking out about. We can cheaply and efficiently talk to these voters now and get them in the habit of voting. So I just want to close by saying, you know what, I'm not even going to get to that slide yet. I just want to close by saying this. You know, when you're the executive director of a nonprofit, that there are pretty much like 2 ways to raise money. One is you spend your time trying to convince people to donate when maybe they don't want to. That's not the approach I take. If this doesn't sound like your cup of tea, that's fine. That's fine. There are so many great organizations out there doing enormously important work. I take the second approach, and that is I try to find people whose values and their hopes, what they want to achieve in the world, the change that they want to achieve in the world, aligns with what we do at the Environmental Voter Project. People who care deeply about addressing the climate crisis, and people who care deeply about increasing voter turnout of people like this to address the democracy crisis we have in the United States. My guess is, by the very nature of the fact that you are listening to my voice right now, you are likely one of these people. You are likely here because you also care deeply about these issues. So please, not for me, not for the Environmental Voter Project, not for our nonprofit, but for you, for the things that you care deeply about, invest in this stuff happening. This is quite literally the change that you want to see over the next 14 months. We are making it happen. We are making it happen, but we need the money to get the results that you want. So please take a moment, click on the link that's in the chat. If you've already made a donation, thank you so, so much. If you haven't yet made a donation, please take some time over the next 90 seconds to contribute. We're going to take a 90-second break before going to our optional Q&A. For those of you who don't want to stick around for this extended Q&A, we've gotten a lot of requests to have a nice long Q&A, but I know that's not everybody's cup of tea. If you don't want to stick around for it, thank you so much for joining us. It was an enormous pleasure to have you here. Hopefully you all enjoyed Perry as much as we did. Hopefully you all understand why Jade Begay is such a rock star, like all of us know. And thank you for being here. For those of you who do want to stick around for the optional Q&A, we're going to start that now in about 45 seconds. But in the meantime, please click that donation link in the chat. Or if you want to use the QR code, again, you can just pick up your phone, tap on the camera icon, go like this, and you will just see a little link pop up on your phone, and you can press it, and that will bring you right to the donation page for this event. All right, Shannon, we have a few more seconds to let people donate. You can donate however much as you want. There's no limit. Should have mentioned that. You want to donate $1 million. Well, if you want to donate $1 million, let's not lose any credit card fees. Maybe you should reach out to us for that. But there is no limit on what you can donate.
Well, Nathaniel, Joanne shared in the Q&A that she is already a monthly donor with us, but just increased her amount by an additional $5 a month. she did want us to share that with everybody else. So she hopes others join her in that as well. And I swear you can check the answered questions. I'm not making that up. Joanne wanted me to share that. And we have a new monthly donor, Veronica, and another new donor of George. So just wanted to shout out those folks who took that 90-second challenge seriously, Nathaniel, before we go into our full Q&A.
Thank you, George. Thank you, Veronica. Thank you. Who was the first one? Gosh, I've already forgotten. Oh,
Joanne.
Joanne. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
And many more of you who I'm sure we will be getting back to shortly. All right. This is actually, I'm going to send my first question to my amazing colleagues who are handling the chat. There have been a few questions. If someone could put the mailing address for checks in the chat, just so those who have their checkbooks out right in front of them can go ahead and write that check while we're having our conversation. So that's the first question. You're off the hook, Nathaniel. Someone else can take care of that. But great questions from a whole bunch of folks. So I'll first highlight Rebecca's. You talked about how we use a bunch of different methods to reach voters, especially in that effective messaging piece. Do we know which methods, mail, digital, calls are more effective, and do we know why?
Really, really great question, Rebecca. So first, just for those of you who don't know, the methods that we use to reach voters are phone calls. So volunteer phone calls, volunteer canvassing, volunteer postcards, digital ads, which are obviously not sent by volunteers, and direct mail that is not sent by volunteers. So those 5 things. And Rebecca, when we judge the impact of these different methods, we don't just look at what is the most effective. We also look at what is the most efficient. So I'm going to talk about both things, if that's okay. By effectiveness, at least the way we think of it, is for each contact made through that method, what is the ceiling that you can possibly increase turnout, right? So for each contact made, which has the highest potential of increasing turnout. For efficiency, it is for each volunteer hour spent, or for each dollar spent, how many additional votes are created, or how impactful is it? And as you can imagine, sometimes effectiveness and efficiency aren't always the same. Sometimes things that are really effective aren't that efficient because, for instance, like canvassing, it takes a long time to knock on doors. All right, now to finally answer your question, Rebecca. The most effective, so for each contact made, the greatest boost in turnout is still face-to-face, good old-fashioned door-to-door canvassing. One human being having a conversation with another human being is still the best way to turn non-voters into new voters and new voters into consistent voters, period. However, it is not that efficient. Even if you find really dense neighborhoods, which we try to do, and even if it's a time of the day when a lot of people are home, at best, maybe you will have 10, 15 conversations an hour at best. Like, that's really, really good. And obviously, that's much less than what you might be able to get if you are on the phones or if you're doing digital ads and direct mail and things like that. So the most effective is canvassing. After that, it's probably direct mail. And then on the efficiency end of things, so which gets you the most additional votes for the least money spent or the least volunteer time spent? It is direct mail and digital ads are very efficient. So they're both efficient and effective. And believe it or not, phone calls. Now, phone calls have a very low ceiling. You're never going to boost turnout more than a point or 1.5 points from phone calls. And even in really high elections, it's going to be lower than that. But it's really, really efficient. It's really, really efficient. The final thing that I will just say, Rebecca, is there are so many voters, particularly low propensity voters, who you need to reach out to them in multiple ways. One, just to get their attention, but two, because it's harder to find them. I mean, there were a bunch of things that Jade Begay mentioned that I just always learned so much. But one of the things that she mentioned was like, her mom doesn't even have an address. If you're doing a direct mail campaign, how do you reach her mom? If you are not a neighbor who actually lives there, how do you know to canvass her? And so these are things that don't just happen in neighborhoods like that. They happen with college students who move every year and things like that. And so really, it is always important to try to have this multimodal outreach to so many of these candidates. But to answer your question, canvassing most effective, direct mail probably the most efficient.
Well, I'm so glad that you just brought up Jade Begay and something that she noted as well. A great question from Laura. As Jade did bring up, many people are non-voters, not because they're like lazy or they don't want to vote, but because there are barriers involved. Does EVP address that in any way, or any other thoughts that you have around that?
Really, really good point and really, really good question. So first, just to set the stage, just in case you didn't realize how big an issue this is to the environmental community. If I were to, and I hate doing this because we try to take a very precise individualistic approach to how we identify voters, but if I were to speak in broad demographic terms, these low propensity environmental voters, regardless of the state that you're talking about, are disproportionately young, disproportionately people of color, and disproportionately lower income. And I can guarantee you, no matter where you are, if some government entity is trying to make it harder for someone to vote, they're either targeting young people, people of color, or lower income people. And so what this means is that ballot access is of supreme importance to the modern environmental movement. Voter suppression is of supreme importance to the modern environmental movement. So this is a very, very important question, and I'm so glad it was surfaced. Okay, what do we do and what do we not do? First, let me start with what we don't do. We aren't a litigation shop. I am very, very proud of the stuff that we do. I think we're very, very good at what we do, but we keep to our lane. We're not litigators. But even though we don't do a lot of the very, very important ballot access and voting rights litigation, once these laws are passed, there is an enormous amount of voter education work that needs to be done simply teaching them how to vote. And I know that seems so basic and simple to so many of us, but believe me, it isn't. Even if, and this is an enormous if, even if you get beyond a lot of the sociological barriers and historical barriers and the distrust that is built up in communities of whether their vote is going to be counted or whether the government is going to treat them well or appropriately, even if you get beyond that, the logistics of voting change. Even if there are no evil actors, even if no one is trying to suppress your vote, there's no one like curling their mustache saying, I'm going to get those environmentalists. Well, simply because of COVID, most of the people we are now targeting, well, the last time they voted, the whole world was different. It was totally different. They could vote in completely different ways. And so not only do we do important work teaching people and trying to make it easy and clear how they can vote and letting them know how the laws have changed. But for many people who even think that they know how to vote, we need to let them know that they need to relearn how to do it. That actually that place in Harris County, Texas, where they could show up at 1 a.m. to drop off their ballot ain't doing that anymore. Or now they need an excuse in a certain state to mail in their ballot or things like that. This is the enormous work that needs to be done. And I got to tell you, if we leave it all until September or October of 2024, it's too late. All of these people, I mean, let's take Harris County, where Houston is in Texas. All of these people in Texas who think they know how to vote, but actually need to be retaught how to vote, and all of the new ways that are available for them to vote, and all of the ways that are no longer available for them to vote. They have a mayoral election coming up on November 7th, and then a likely runoff a month later. Not only is that important in and of itself, because being the mayor of the fourth largest city in the country is pretty darn important, but this is a valuable opportunity to reteach these environmentalists how to vote. And so that's where we fit in the equation. We recognize that although we're not lawyers and we can't fight to change the laws, once they're there, we do need to communicate with all of these voters, not just at the last minute, but year round, so that when a presidential election comes up or a midterm comes up, they're ready to go. They know how to vote. That's where we fit in.
And I'll jump in a little bit on that, because our next question, Nathaniel, is what can a volunteer do? What can someone on this call do? And I just want to highlight what you just said when you said we. We talk to these voters. We help educate these voters. When Nathaniel says we, he doesn't just mean him and I and my colleagues on the call. He means literally you. Like, you will be the one having these conversations with a lot of these voters. We'll do some of them, but to talk to all the voters that need to be talked to, we do need you. And Nathaniel, I'll let you elaborate on that as well.
Yeah, it's, I love data. Surprise, surprise. I'm like really nerdy and I obsess over the data, but I gotta say, like, sometimes I wish all of you could just see like the Slack that we have over the staff, where we get these messages from volunteers who have just gotten off a phone bank, and they're like, this person had no idea that there was an election coming up, or they had no idea that their polling place had changed, or they thought that they could request a ballot and didn't realize that now that they couldn't, and things like that. And obviously politics is a numbers game. We really care about denominators, we really care about numerators, and we really care about winning. Like, I get it. Boy, am I with you on that. But there's something really, really special when you, as a volunteer, get to help someone do something that they really want to do and they know it's important. And these are all of the stories that, in a cumulative way, fight voter suppression. But they're more than just the data. It's more than just the number of votes. Like, I know it sounds corny, and I know being on the phones or knocking on doors or writing postcards isn't always fun. Believe me, I understand that. But man, like, there are some moments of magic. There really, really are.
And it was sent in the chat earlier. As the organizing director, I have to say, but we'll send it again. There's a link for you to get involved with opportunities. As soon as tomorrow, you can join Perry for a phone bank, but we've got plenty of others as well. All right, something we've mentioned a bunch of times that I think could use some clarity, Nathaniel. We're talking about non-voters, and we're talking about public voting data. If we're using public voting records to identify voters, how are we identifying non-voters?
Really, really great question. So first of all, the voter file is somewhat of a misnomer. It obviously isn't just voters. It, oddly enough, isn't just registered voters. Sometimes there's more than that. But let's not worry about that, because we at EVP only deal with registered voters. There is a publicly available list of all registered voters in every jurisdiction in the United States. And for those of you who aren't aware of this, I ask you to just pause and really let this sink in. Because if there is one piece of information that I think is tragically misunderstood or not understood about modern American politics, it's the importance of the voter file. And yes, I know how like terribly nerdy that sounds, but it's true. It's true. Who you vote for is secret. I think that's something that we all understand. But whether you vote or not is public record. It is public record. And take it from someone who has run or been a senior advisor on dozens of campaigns. The first thing any campaign does is they open up their laptops, they look at that list of publicly available registered voters. You could go to City Hall and get it on a thumb drive, or you can subscribe to a company that collates all the information for you, and that's what we do, and that's what campaigns do. So the first meeting is you open up your laptop, you look at the list of of registered voters, and it literally tells you which elections Jane Smith votes in and which ones she doesn't. And so if I am running, let's say, Shannon's campaign for governor, let's say Shannon is running for governor of Massachusetts, and she can't afford anybody better to run her campaign than me. Well, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to say, okay, well, here are a bunch of people who are registered to vote, but they've never cast a ballot. Probably not going to talk to them. Here are a bunch of people who are registered to vote, but they only vote in presidential elections. Well, governor of Massachusetts, that's a midterm election. So, I mean, unless we are made of money and got all the time in the world, we're probably not going to talk to them either. Oh, here are people who do vote in gubernatorial elections. Yeah, we are going to talk to them. Oh, and here are even people who vote in local elections. Yeah, we'll definitely talk to them too. And not to put too fine a point on it, but like, we literally know these people by name and street address. By name and street address. And I mean we in the largest possible sense. It's not just the Environmental Voter Project. This is every campaign out there. And this gets to why I said earlier, this is such an important and I fear misunderstood part of modern American politics. This is why politicians don't care about non-voters. They literally know who they are. And this is why it's so supremely important for not just environmentalists, but people who list climate and environmental issues as their #1 priority to vote. Not just because it increases the likelihood of electing the so-called right people, but because if I'm running Shannon's campaign for governor, not only are we only going to target the people who are likely to vote, but who the hell do you think we're going to poll? We're not going to poll the non-voters. Who cares what they think? They aren't showing up. Shannon hired me to be her campaign manager, not to get all the non-voters to like her, but to get 50% +1 of the vote on a Tuesday in November, period. This is how politicians think. And this is why it is so supremely important to flood the zone with as many voters as possible who care about the environment and climate change. And the final thing I'll just say about this is important even after the elections take place. Because even when we elect the so-called right people, it isn't like they can just snap their fingers and get whatever they want. They still need to decide what to spend their precious political capital on. And they ain't going to do it on the thing that non-voters care about. Politicians are in the business of winning elections. And I know that sounds callous and cynical, but it's just the brutal arithmetic of how democracy works. Like, this is what it means to be in a democracy. Politicians are the ones who win, not the ones who lose. And so this is why this work is so supremely important. But this is also why, to get back to the core of the question, we can look at these super environmentalist voting histories and we can say, okay, we're mobilizing people for a midterm. So we've identified all these super environmentalists. Let's go after the ones who don't vote in midterms because they're the ones who need our behavioral interventions. But on the other hand, if you're a super environmentalist who does have a history of voting in midterms, we won't waste our time with you. You don't need a behavioral intervention. You're already doing that thing. We zig where all these other groups zag. We go after the people who need this behavioral intervention.
All right, and this will be our last question. You've gotten somehow to all of them, Nathaniel, you and Peter and Ren in the Q&A. The elections this year are important. The elections next year are also really important. So if anonymous attendee who asked this question wants to do one thing today to help out in 2024, what should that be?
Donate an absurd amount of money. I mean, like a ludicrous amount of money to the Environmental Voter Project. All right, so certainly, thank you. I see the donate here, like just appeared in the chat. Well done, Danielle. Thank you. So I brought up the importance of the public voter file. If we get someone to vote for the first time this fall in, say, the Charlotte, North Carolina mayoral election, or the Houston mayoral election, or the Savannah, Georgia mayoral election, or in Tucson, Arizona, or in Pennsylvania's state Supreme Court election. Notice I'm mentioning all these battleground states. If we get them to vote for the first time this fall, remember what I said, whether you vote or not is public record. Something magical will happen. Not only will we have started a non-voter down this path towards becoming a habitual voter, but what will also happen is by January or February of next year, the history, the record of them having voted this fall will show up on these public voter records. And everybody who is running for anything next year, Congress, Senate, President, will see that. They will see it like there's a bright red beacon next to the voter's name saying, hey, look at me, I just voted in the Charlotte, North Carolina mayoral election. And then all of them will say, holy moly, go get that person. This is how campaigns target people. So if you want to know what I consider to be the single best and most efficient way for you to have an impact on 2024, it's to get really serious about funding voter turnout efforts in 2023. I mean it. I mean it. Voting is not this like random one-off cost-benefit analysis decision that people wake up and do every 2 years. No, it can become a habitual behavior. It absolutely can. And part of it has to do with the public voter file, and part of it has to do with just us teaching people how to vote more often. So you can click on that link in the chat and please, please make a generous donation. Shannon said that was our last question, so I'm going to use this to vamp into our close. Thank you. I can't believe we still have such an enormous number of people on for this extended Q&A. I really, really appreciate it. I want to remind you that everybody who makes a donation as part of this event will get a recording of all of those 4 mini briefings that were in the poll. I'm going to wake up tomorrow morning and record the 3 that I did not give. And people who donated will get access to that, you know, like, I don't know, 3 or 4 weeks before we make it available to anybody else. So you will get a lot of sort of deep dive, intricate information on that. Folks, I just want to close by reiterating what I mentioned maybe about 30, 35 minutes ago. And that is, you're here for a reason. I'm not trying to convince you to support something that you don't want to support. But if you care deeply about the climate crisis, at a moment in time where, my God, I mean, there are literally thousands of people dying every day from floods and other tragedies. If this is something that you care deeply about, and if the health of American democracy and voter turnout is something that you care deeply about, don't do this for us, do this for you. Help us help you reach your goals. Help us help you achieve the change that you want to see in addressing the climate crisis and addressing the democracy crisis. We are a nonprofit. I ain't going to get rich off your donations. I want to get them right into the field to make new voters. 91% of our expenditures last year were on program expenses. We run really, really lean. So please take a moment, click on that link in the chat, open it up so that it's there. We all know what happens at the end of a Zoom call, right? You log out and you're like, oh my God, where did that link go? We'll just click on it now in the chat so that it's open. And please donate generously. If you've already donated, you're welcome to donate again. And finally, just thank you. Thank you to all of you. Thank you to our hosts on the host committee. Thank you to people who have donated big and small. Thank you to our volunteers. Thank you to our incredible staff who are all on making tonight happen. Thank you to our incredible board. I hope all of you take tremendous pride in all of these results that we're getting, because you literally make them happen. That isn't like some saccharine thing I'm just saying. Like, you are the volunteers who make them happen. You are the donors who make them happen. So thank you for letting us do this work for you. It's a tremendous honor, and I can't wait to see you all again. Have a good night, everybody.